Hello, my name's Cliff Freilich. I'm the Executive Director of Cinema St. Louis. Welcome. I hope you've enjoyed the screening of Flannery. We are pleased to be joined by one of the co-directors of Flannery, Father Mark Bosco. He is actually a native of St. Louis and went to St. Louis University as both an undergrad and I think got his master's here. He can clarify that in a moment or so. I thought it would be only appropriate, therefore, to have somebody from St. Louis University do the interview. I'm an alum myself, so I technically qualified, but nonetheless, I thought it would be even more fun to have an old professor of mine, Avis Meyer. Avis is now retired. He's emeritus, but he was a longtime professor of communications at St. Louis U. He has also a great fondness for Flannery O'Connor, so I remembered that and thought it would be an appropriate person to have do the interview with Father Mark. All right, and I should also note the fact that Avis spent many, many years as the faculty advisor for the St. Louis University News, which I was a member of and remember fondly. All right, I'm going to turn things over now to Avis and Father Mark.
That's us.
Excellent.
Well, Father Mark, I have all sorts of questions to ask, and I enjoyed the film immensely. A lot of it I knew, but not nearly the detail you provided. It was a delight. I'd love to have a copy someday. Now, I have a series of questions. I hate to tell you how much time I spent on this. There's 4 pages. We'll never get to them. But I put them in categories: inspiration, intent, takeaways, and surprises. And this is sometimes your intent and your surprises, but there were surprises for me. And the very first thing I thought, how did he get Tommy Lee Jones involved in this? I had no idea Tommy Lee Jones. I mean, who would know? But I'm just curious as a sidebar.
Well, we'll start with that. One of the things that as a producer, I was trying to do was I was collecting all the people who ever talked about Flannery O'Connor, whether it was NPR, whether it was with Terry Gross, whether it was in the newspaper, the New York Times, the St. Louis Post, whatever it could have been. And I heard Tommy Lee Jones say that he had done his his Harvard senior thesis on Flannery O'Connor. And so when I found that out, that made sense because, you know, Robert Fitzgerald and Sally Fitzgerald, good friends of Flannery. Robert was teaching there at the time. Sally was there. And so there was a kind of a little small group that were really interested in promoting O'Connor's literary work in canon. So he did his thing. That's how I know. If you see his film, The Three Burials of Melquiades Estrada, came out.
I'm not.
I mean, it's like watching him channel Flannery O'Connor's aesthetics of violence and grace right there. So yeah.
That's good to know. Well, as soon as his name popped up, I remember this great quote. This is a slight tangent. Years ago, Pauline Kael wrote a review, I think, of a Tommy Lee Jones movie. Don't remember which. She referred to him, and I've never forgotten it, as a sort of a hillbilly Nureyev, which I thought was a delightful categorization. That's one of the surprises. About inspiration, did this film come from something sparked by all of her work, by a specific piece? That's a short story. I mean, I remember the very first time I read this. I'm a little older than you, but in 1958, I read Good Country People, and ever since I've been a fan, ever since. And I wonder if it was just one story or all the work or her character that prompted this and sparked it.
Yeah, I work in, I'm at Georgetown now, mostly as an administrator, but my work was on the intersection of English and theology. And so I was always attracted with whether I was the English department at SLU or going on to graduate school. I was always interested in the kind of the interface or the connections, the interpenetration between literature and religion. And so Flannery O'Connor was always on my radar. I was starting to move more and more into moving from Graham Greene, which was what I really focused on, into Flannery. And what the inspiration for the film came from is I was working on a book on Graham Greene, and I was at the British Library staying with a buddy of mine in London named Chris O'Hare. He's one of our executive producers. Chris was friends with Sally Fitzgerald when he was at Harvard as an undergrad. So
Did you know this going into it?
I always knew that, you know, he'd gone to Harvard, but I
Yeah.
had no idea. And what he said to me was, he says, "Oh, if you're working on this kind of stuff, I did these tapes in 1999. This is 2005.
Yeah.
I did these tapes in 1999 of all the people who knew Flannery O'Connor, because I knew Sally Fitzgerald was dying of cancer, and I wanted to kind of get this." So he hands me, he's a producer himself in London. He hands me this 12, 13 hours of film. And the inspiration was like, oh my God, here's the backbone of a documentary with Sally Fitzgerald, Bob Giroux, Billy Sessions. There's just, I mean, all of those people that have now passed away. And so that was the real start of it. It's like, and I sat on it because I was finishing something else. I sat on it until about 2011, and then and then I got my my colleague Elizabeth Kaufman, who's a award-winning documentarian who teaches at Loyola University in Chicago, on board, and it was really a collaboration. So that's the inspiration.
Well, is that where some of the still black and whites came from?
Those we actually found some of those in the archives that are we found a camera with film still in it that was in a box. We had that developed and used that.
Wow.
There's so few images of Flannery O'Connor. There's only that one video, the film from the Harvey Bright. I just love the smoking cigarettes on the on TV. But that's the only film of her in existence, besides those family films that we see her as a kid. And so we were just looking for pictures. We were hungry for pictures anywhere we could find.
Well, I've had a picture of her standing she has a peacock in front of her, leaning on a cane, and an old beat up 61 Pontiac that's missing a hubcap in the background. That's been under my desk at St. Louis U for decades. But the pictures of you ever riding a horse at one point. Right. I mean, that was an absolute delight. Something completely fresh. So is there an intent in this beyond just trying to get people like me who are automatically aficionados and interested? Is the intent to get more people aware of this, I hope? Yeah, really, I guess our intent was twofold. I mean, in many ways, it was a passion project for me. My intent was to do two things. One was to get people to want to read Flannery O'Connor. So we see this as a kind of a general invitation, a film that will draw you in. But secondly, we were really concerned with the fact that, you know, she lives during the Jim Crow South, that in some ways she's a cultural marker for the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, post-World War II, you know, the traumas of that time. Race, obviously, we were 3 years into our film in 2015 when Black Lives Matter just started. So we knew that race and racism had to be part of it. Disability, we were just so aware that she, in some ways, with a disability, with being a woman in the South who was Catholic, that it just says something about America, and that all these intellectuals that she says up in, you know, really took her on and said, we want to promote your work. So the idea that she was a woman, the idea she was Catholic, disabled in some ways through lupus, her sense of race, all kind of became these four pillars, you might say, that we said, well, if anybody sees this film, we've done a little bit deeper dive in those areas than just biography. True. I know some of this, not all. Did you go to Milledgeville and kind of bounce around the town? I've done that just once. Well, tell me your experiences there, because mine are just your story, not mine. Well, it was a lot of fun many times there. Certainly filming the farm, visiting the outside. Andalusia. Andalusia, yeah. You know why it was called Andalusia? Well, I know it's, my wife are lucky. We've traveled, we've driven through Andalusia, the real Andalusia in Spain, Seville, and I wonder was there a Spanish background in her house? So the story goes is that they named the farm Andalusia because the Spanish explorers came up from Florida and they got that far up into Georgia and they went back. And so it's called Andalusia because of the Andalusia, right? So this is how the Spanish. And of course, by saying Spanish, we're also saying, quote, which is important, Catholic, right? Yes. So O'Connor kind of thinks that this is the borderline between Catholic, Protestant, Old World, New World, in this little, strange place called Milledgeville.
Yeah.
Did you run into anybody in Milledgeville that was surprised you were doing this? When we stopped in, 10-second story, it was on a Sunday afternoon. I went to get some gasoline before I headed into the town, and I asked the young woman behind the counter if she could tell me where I might find some information about Flannery O'Connor, and the woman said, "Who's he?"
Yeah. By the time,
and since it was a Sunday, I was stumped as to where to go. The newspaper was shut down. No one's at the little Catholic church. Went to the police station, and I got exactly that answer from the guy behind the desk. Exactly. Who's he? And I said, how many policemen are on duty? This is worth sharing. He said 3. I said, many of them been to the local college? Yes. You know if they're English majors? Why? She said 1. I called that woman on through the intercom, and I said, I'm curious if you could tell me something about Flannery O'Connor. She said, I'll be right there. And we had a tour of the town, including where she lived on Green Street.
That's great. That's great.
And went out to Andalusia about 15 years ago. But anyway, it's your story. I'm glad you didn't run anybody that said, who's he?
We didn't run into anybody like that. We were really treated well. It took us a while to get the trust of some of Flannery O'Connor's family, because they were concerned that, that we do right by Flannery. But we did meet some characters. There's no doubt about it. Milledgeville had the largest psychological, hospital basically in the whole country at one time. And so this idea that there were always kind of strange people, kind of crazy people, kind of quote freaks, as Flannery kind of, and were already out there. If they weren't inside the sanatorium, they were outside. So it has this kind of thing. But really pleasurable to be there and be at the house.
Well, I grew up in a really, really small town, much smaller than Milledgeville, and it felt like sort of home to me when we were there for just a few hours. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I did not know as much about, and your film informed me of this, I knew, and I'm going to mispronounce this guy's name, Eric Langkauer. And Longcare. I knew a little bit about that, but not nearly as much. And there's 2 phrases. I've been working on this, how to tell you this without sounding like I'm being phony. I love that you included, there's 2 quotes. One by John Huston himself, making Wise Blood.
Yeah.
And another one from Eric, whatever his last name is. I thought, I'm sure you put these in there because they sounded like something one of her characters might have said in one of her short stories. And I hope that she never knew that Eric said of her that kissing her was like kissing a skeleton. I hope she never knew that.
She never knew that, no.
Good. But of all the people in the world, you'll know what I'm referring to. When John Huston was trying to figure out where Hazel Motes is going and what Wise was going, he just said, this sounded like a character out of both Flannery O'Connor's book, Jesus always wins. It sounded like she wrote it and he said it.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, it was great to interview Michael Fitzgerald and Benedict in there as well, and some of the cast. We were really, because Michael Fitzgerald really introduced us to Tommy Lee Jones, who he's friends with in California. So that's how we got to Tommy Lee Jones. He didn't brush us aside. Eric Landcare, you asked what was inspired. I had to say my first scholarship was on Eric. So I went to Denmark and I met him 3 times. Even though the film was from Chris O'Hara, our executive producer, I went to him and it was very important. I got into a lot of trouble when we put that about that. She felt like kissing a skeleton.
Yeah,
especially the women in Milledgeville thought it was such a terrible thing. But he didn't mean it. He meant it to talk about his own psychological processes, so that when he was going to leave, that was still part of his thoughts. I got to tell you the story though. It was the most moving thing. The 3rd time I went to Denmark, to Copenhagen, to see him and his wife Mette, I brought a tape of Flannery O'Connor reading A Good Man Is Hard to Find.
She read it herself.
Yeah, there's about 4 different ones of it going on, and we have a little bit in our film. But we did the whole thing in his living room, and Eric just cried. He cried for almost 40 minutes. There's just tears that slowly came down, and I said, "Are you okay?" Or he says, "You know what? I had not heard her voice since I left her like 1954, and he had come back to the United States but never worked in the South, and they had a couple more letters together, but things had changed with him being married to Mette." And I think it was such a moving moment. And I felt so gifted to be there at that moment. Because I had just not heard her voice since 1950.
Thank you for sharing that. Good grief, no wonder. So another thing, I knew very little about Betty Hester.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Someone dropped a note years ago. Again, I get so excited about this stuff in class that I start telling stories about going to Milledgeville, blah blah blah. But I want them to love her work as much as I do. But I did know about Betty Hester, and I'm not suggesting there's anything going on, but that's the woman to whom she wrote her last letter. Seemed really significant, and I'm wondering what it was.
That was Mariette Lee, actually. She wrote her last letter to Mariette Lee.
That's true. My notes crossed over.
But those are the two very strong relationships with strong women that Flannery O'Connor had in her life. Flannery was such a good friend to her friends. I mean, she learned how to be the best friend she could, given the fact that she was in Milledgeville on crutches, and it was all epistolary. It was this kind of responding to their questions, their desires, praying for them. I mean, yeah, but they were very close. I think that if Betty Hester's letters are about exploring the religious imagination of Flannery O'Connor and how it gets kind of embodied and employed in her work, what I think Mariette Lee does, which I hope we brought out in the film, was this sense that Mariette Lee was Flannery's equal. I mean, she was an artist, she was a dramatist, she was a painter, she was a civil rights activist in Harlem, and it allowed Flannery O'Connor to, I think, to move and grow and walk more and more into what was going on with civil rights.
And she did it willingly.
Yeah, she did it willingly. And it was very much, they had a joke all the time. They called each other Ray Bear or Tar Bear. Or they would play on names from her Flannery O'Connor's second novel. There was a real sense of performing the country bumpkin girl to Mariette's, Harvard liberal, person up in the New York City area. And they played on those kinds of like roles. And so it's quite beautiful to see those letters.
I envy you this experience. This is an easy segue, talking about all the race problems. Was it 3 months ago in New York, we had a column about Flannery O'Connor's racism. And I was aware of some of this, but to be completely candid, it was a little more pronounced than I wish it had been. It does not change the way I feel about her writing, period. But it changed the way I feel about her a little bit. Is that true for you?
Well, you know what? I had to come to terms with that because I've seen, although that was revealed by Paul Eli, I had seen those many years ago. So I came to grapple with it even as the film was being put together. What I think, what I'd say two things. What you see is that Flannery O'Connor, as an 18-year-old, is writing postcards to a mother who uses the N-word constantly in their banter. And so the postcards say she's doing this. She's an 18-year-old who's never left the South. She's visiting her cousins up in New York and in Boston.
Understood. Yeah.
So that's it. And then if you get to where she uses it with Mariette Lee and later in her life, what I don't like is that it's clipped out all the other paragraphs around it. You can see that there's a kind of a performative nature of O'Connor talking this way in response to Mariette. It's not genuine. It's not sincere. Although there's in everything, there's some of that. So this is what I think. O'Connor breathed in Jim Crow South. She had the assumptions of white privilege. She took them for granted. She basically was somebody who was, I think, an integrationist, but was always aware with her disability and being in the South that she's still breathing in this kind of racist place. I call her a recovering racist.
That's good. No, that's good.
She's always recovering from the white privilege, the assumptions that she has, and she's always indicting those characters, right? All those stories we love. She indicts those assumptions.
All those white trash folks. I mean,
yeah.
The ladies with legs look like upside down pears.
Right, or even Ruby Turpin, who thinks so much highly. I mean, that's her last great work, her short story, and she's working it out with Mariette Lee. I think. I mean, I think that's her kind of gift to Mariette Lee, saying, and I am both Ruby Turpin but I'm more than that. There is this sense of coming to grips with that. So, O'Connor dies in 1964, 1 month after the Civil Rights Bill. She's gone. So we can look at her work and say, oh, she was this racist. That cancel culture doesn't work for me. So I do feel like it's jarring. And when I teach Flannery O'Connor, we don't say the N-word. We, as a class of students, we figure out, what do we say when we talk or we read out loud? How do you want to feel the dissonance of 1955 to 2020 in how we talk about it? But at the same time, let's not indict her as and cancel out this great artist who I think her art is her working out her redemption, right?
No, I agree. I remember teaching the artificial N-word, and I thought the day I taught that in class, how am I going to get around this without sounding awkward? And we just talked about it openly as you did. It's not something that I believe. I don't think that she believed it, but New York was a little tough on her. I thought you were very even-handed about this, but I think it's important to include it. I thought it was really.
Absolutely.
This is a small detail. The aerial shot of Andalusia, did that come from some other farm? You didn't have to hire a plane to do this, did you?
No, we got,
I remember.
Yeah. So actually, Ted Hardin, who was our cinematographer, he did that when I wasn't even there. He went down there, got one of those, what do you call them? They hover up,
Oh, yeah. I know what you mean. Little hover,
yeah,
drone.
Yeah, drone.
Cliff nose drone. Yeah, cliff nose.
He got a drone, and he did it through by drones because we wanted to have a sense of O'Connor's all about showing distances and the cosmic or the transcendental, and we thought it would be really cool to have something from way up high to see the property, the land. So you have her on her porch, but you also have this kind of transcendental moment to see the place.
Well, that shot reminded me of something that I would only mention to you because you might make the connection. One of my favorite stories is Late Brief Encounter with the Enemy.
Yeah.
Well, the little general. It reminded me of the description of the closing shot after the little chubby Boy Scout, John Wesley, for God's sake, pushes the dead Confederate general no one knows is dead out in the middle of a football field and leans him against the goalpost. And it's almost like she pulls back and watches him as the melee surrounds him, and he's just sitting there oblivious because he's no longer with us, and no one knows or cares. I thought that reminded me of that shot. Well,
that's great. I'm actually teaching that story on Monday in my Flannery O'Connor seminar here at Georgetown. So it's funny that you say that. You know what I found interesting that we didn't get in the film about, which kind of points to that story, and we had to take it out because we just didn't have enough time. But Flannery O'Connor, I think she's writing this story because she hates that kind of Gone with the Wind, pageantry.
Yeah,
I mean, she's allergic to that. And this is a kind of a satire on all that kind of stuff. But she was 12 years, she was living in Atlanta. They moved from Savannah to Atlanta when the premiere of Gone with the Wind was there. And so she would have known that as a 12-year-old, all that kind of hoopla about this.
All that hoopla.
Yeah. And what's fascinating about it, which I don't think a lot of people know, is that Martin Luther King was a 6-year-old whose father allowed him to sing these Negro spirituals as entertainment for the white audience because no African American was allowed into the big premiere. So it's like this weird convergence. O'Connor's there somewhere in the city. Martin Luther King is a 6-year-old, 6 years younger than her. He's singing because his own father, Ebenezer, from the Ebenezer Church, said he could.
Ebenezer.
And it's an incredible moment, but we used to have time to do that. Yeah.
And of course, Hattie McDaniel's family couldn't even come, and she won the Academy Award.
Yeah, exactly.
I know, it's just remarkable. I love talking with you, but another couple of things while we have time. I was vaguely aware of her cartoons and her cartoon favorite, but I absolutely love looking at these. You may not be familiar to you, the O'Connor Bulletin. Yeah. One of my favorite moments, I got published in this, and I did an analysis of Hazel Motes as being a composite of 15 other people. And they agreed with me and they published it. But until I read my own article 20 years ago in that magazine, I didn't know she did cartoons because there are cartoons in that issue. Tell me how you stumbled on this and how you decided to cover it the way you did, because I thought it was a delight.
Yeah, because we realized that she had cartoons from college because they were kind of kept at Millersville in the college where she was. But what we didn't know when we explored the archives and the history at Emory was that there was a box of these booklets that she made that she wanted published. She really wanted to publish them as a 6, 7, 8-year-old. I think her first ones were when she's 6. The last ones are like when she's 9 and 10. And when we found out that she was such a cartoonist, that she really wanted to do this in life, we thought that gave us a kind of an entranceway into using cartoons and animation to embody some of the stories, to kind of tell the stories during the film. So it was a great kind of bridge. OConnor, the cartoonist, the animator, and then we hired these women cartoonists to kind of dramatize some of the stories. Yeah, but it was incredible. She was so talented.
I mean, some of the figures, at least the looks of them, they remind me of Far Side a little bit, almost coincidentally, a little bit.
Yeah.
And I don't know who made the decision to end the movie with a quote from Revelation, but it could not have been any better. I hope that was yours.
It was mutual, but we knew Revelation had to be it, and we kept on talking about the Hallelujah at the end of Ruby Turpin walking. That in some ways we wanted. O'Connor's one of my favorite lines. She says, "We're always looking for the redemptive act." She says that in one of her essays in Mystery and Manners. And so we wanted our film to end with the redemptive act, that kind of walking with the Hallelujah. But I think it's the greatest short story written in the 20th century in America. It's the perfect short story, and that's a Revelation. There's none better in my estimation. There's a lot of good things out there, but that's, I think, her best story.
It's hard to pick my favorite O'Connor story. I mean, because I read Good Country People first, and because when I want to get people interested in O'Connor, I have them read that story. And what we do is, it takes time, but it works. We read it aloud. When we get to the point where a Manly Pointer asks if he can do anything he wants to, I said, "Okay, close your book." I said, "What do you think is going to happen now?" No one has ever guessed he's going to disconnect her leg at the knee. No one's ever. They've guessed a lot of stuff. They've never guessed that, and then they're usually appalled. And I said, "That's because she's original. She's just original."
Yeah.
You had a great quote, and I know this is hers. You said, "What's one of my favorite quotes from her? Fix is not an escape; it's a plunge into reality."
Yeah.
And I think for her, particularly given her situation physically, that was really true.
Yeah, I agree. I think that for her, I mean, well, first of all, going even back to see her prayer journal, and we were the ones that found that the higher mathematics journal that was when she was at college or undergrad. But even from there, you really see her set when she said, I need to be a novelist. I need to be a fiction writer. And then I want to be what kind of fiction writer? I want to be one that's not filled with my own pride and my own sense of being the center of the work. And then you get to that plunge into reality. She thought that what was in front of us could reveal something. And I mean, as obviously the Jesuit priest, for her, that revelation was always the fact that the divine is incarnated in material reality, since we have, Jesus as the incarnation. And so for her, the plunge into reality was the story was to bring us down. Almost, if you think about a sacrament, is always what's behind or within, the surface. It's something deeper going on. Reality, all reality has that sacramental moment if we can just plunge ourselves into it. And usually that's why she has to shake us violently or put a gun to our head every minute of our life. Because
Misfit-like.
Yeah, misfit-like, because that's when we're going to actually be able to maybe be so destabilized that we'll take the plunge.
But there's another question. I know we're starting to run out of time, and I love us going this quickly. The afflicted, at least I didn't put quotes on this, you didn't say this, but the afflicted as an abused body is the theme of most of her writing. When I read that, I thought, this may be the closest revelation I've had, and I've read this stuff for 20 years. Where did that come from? Is that hers or yours? The afflicted as an abused body.
Yeah, that kind of comes from us. But it came out of a long conversation we had with the novelist Mary Gordon, because we were talking about the fact that bodies are so important in her work, and I think people forget that the human body, whether it's the broken body, it's the body without an arm, it's the body without a leg, it's the body with a barbed wire around a heart.
Hazel Moats wraps himself
Yeah.
in barbed wire. Yeah.
It's this body, and it's body and suffering. And so, she's a Roman Catholic girl who goes to Mass every single day as a child, and she's a woman who goes to Mass. She understands suffering as a conduit for grace, right? I mean, that's just kind of in her bones, in her own body, kind of being, kind of eaten up by lupus. So I think there is a sense that I want to say that O'Connor really actually puts the body almost in a premier place. And we're kind of shocked by it because it's not the body, it's not the celluloid perfect body, it's not the body of magazines and Cosmopolitan, but it's the body that's real. And it's the body that sometimes is made grotesque so that it has that deeper kind of sense that, we're all a little grotesque. And if we don't admit it, we're going to be in big trouble.
That reminds me of one of my favorite students, and it could have been somebody like Cliff or Cliff, said something one day that whenever they read O'Connor's novels, they never know who they're supposed to be like, but there's nobody they want to look like.
That's a great line.
I don't know who said it. Students said, I didn't say it. It's sweet, but I don't want to look like any of them. Even Miss Wally B. Hitchcock with her upside down pair legs, which I still think one of my favorite moments.
Yeah.
Okay, is there a takeaway that you would like everybody when they get to the end of this film to think about and ponder and say, okay, this is what I got from this? Is there an answer to that? Is there a takeaway you want everyone to kind of get?
I think I want, well, first of all, I would say what I got from it was a sense of the interconnectedness of her life and her work. I mean,
yes.
Even in 19, when she's talking about the fact, or 18, when she's talking about the fact that she feels like she's got arthritis, her dad just died 2 years earlier.
And they don't tell her why, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They did. I learned that from you. They didn't tell her why. Good grief.
Almost 9 months after she got better, finally.
Sally Fitzgerald.
Yeah. So yeah. I feel what I learned about it, and what I hope the film does is it shows the interconnectedness of her talent with her life, with her faith, and with the context that she's born in. I think of her as a kind of an exemplar of an American moment, that here's somebody who's unique and different, but also can speak to us today in our times. I mean, talking about race, talking about disability, talking about, she's a feminist in an interesting way, right? She's a feminist who's still very, very devout in her, her faith. But there's this real kind of sense of that. So I think that the takeaway is, if we could see this all as a kind of a work that comes together, life, faith, art, politics, culture, you see it in her, and she's on top of it in her letters. She's on top of it in her writing. She's on top of it in her spiritual kind of life, knowing that she's going to die. I mean, she really she knew she was on a short string.
Another student comment that stayed with me. I'm blessed with bright kids. At the end of the semester, teaching this short story class, one student wrote, I just asked him, I said, make some kind of comment about Flannery O'Connor you want me to remember. And some student wrote something like this. This is close. That it's not just that she died young. It's not just that all of her characters are original and that they always surprise you. But she did this knowing she was going to die young and didn't get married, so it stopped with her, which seems so unselfish, it's almost unbelievable.
Wow, that's great.
That's all true.
And I got to tell you a story. One of my students who did the doctorate on and used Flannery O'Connor when I was still in Chicago. After his dissertation and everything, I met him and his wife, and we had a little celebration. And I said, well, you did really great on this. And he says, and his wife came up to me and says, he reads The Habit of Being over and over again. I said, what do you mean? He said, he's on his 6th time. When I go to bed at night, Flannery has my husband for half an hour every evening.
Flannery has my husband. That's great.
Because he reads it, and when he gets done with it, he goes back. So I turned to Mike, and his name was Mike. I said, is that true, Mike? He goes, yeah, I every time I reread her letters, I end it, and then a week later I start again. And then he was on his 6th time. So there is something about O'Connor that she fascinates, and she calls us in, and she kind of makes us laugh at ourselves, and she makes us feel the seriousness of life, and not to take anything for granted, you know. So I think in some ways, these stories from our former students is really what inspires me too. And
I mean, I love being a teacher. I love it.
I want to tell one more too, because a student once said to me, "Well, could you really read Flannery O'Connor and appreciate her without the theology, without the Catholicism kind of there?" And the student raised his hand and said, "Well, if you wanted to eat a banana split with just whipped cream, sure."
That's nice.
I thought that's
Ice cream metaphor. You don't hear that very often.
Yeah.
Ice cream metaphor.
Yeah.
This has been a delight. Thank you for this film. It's been a delight to share it. I'd love to shake hands, but since we can't, I'll give you live long and prosper out of Star Trek.
Okay, very good, very good. It's really been a great joy to be with you guys, and I really appreciate the film being in St. Louis, and I hope a lot of people get a chance to watch it.
I'll encourage them to go, I promise. It's good to meet you, Father Mark.
Thank you to both of you, by the way. I wanted to ask one question at the end here for Father Mark.
Sure.
And that is, obviously, this is your first film. I'm curious as to whether or not, obviously, it was a passion project. Yes. Have you been bitten by the film making bug? Do you intend to pursue future films?
Yeah, at this point, I don't know. We started this in 2011. So most films don't go on for 9 years, 8 years, but this one did because we both had full-time working jobs, you know, as academics, and we had to raise all this money and stuff. So, but because we've won awards now for the film, and I think we could probably get money. So I'm not close to it, but right now I'm just gonna rest with Flannery for a while.
Okay, great. And one final question, and this we have to ask of anybody who hails from St. Louis. Where did you go to high school?
I went to school now called St. Louis Preparatory North. I didn't go to SLU High because my parents moved from the Hill to Florissant when I was in my 8 or 9, I guess. And so I would have probably gone to SLU High, but I went to St. Louis Preparatory North. You probably never even heard of it. It closed down in 1987, 88. Small little Catholic high school, seminary prep school.
I had some friends who attended.
Very good.
All right, well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. By the way, if you grew up on the Hill in your early years, you might want to check out another film that's going to be playing during the festival called America's Last Little Italy, The Hill.
Oh.
A really terrific documentary on the neighborhood.
Is Father Vince in it? Monsignor Vince?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much.
Say hello to all my St. Louis fans, friends, family. Oh, hopefully see you after COVID.
Yes, I wish we could have had you here. All right, thank you all. Thank you, Avis, and thank you, Father Mark.
Thanks, guys. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.